Welcome to the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in Seagirt, a partner of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Today is August 6, 2007. I am Carol Fowler. My honored veteran is Lieutenant Colonel Walter Alvarado, who served as Battalion Commander of the 250th Personnel Services Battalion, New Jersey Army National Guard, in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom, from March of '06 until March of this year, 2007. Currently, Colonel Alvarado serves at Joint Force Headquarters, Fort Dix, New Jersey, Adjutant General's Corps, as the Deputy G1. Is that correct?
That's correct. The only thing I have to clarify is that it's the 50th Personal Services Battalion, not the 250th.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The 250th Personal Services Detachment was one of the subordinate detachments under my command. So it's a separate organization under the 50th PSB.
Very good, thank you. And did you also want to clarify about the drill weekends compared to the weekday job that you have?
Right now I'm the Deputy G1, so I'm in charge of administration for the New Jersey National Guard. I work under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Denny, who's actually the director of the department. But what we do now versus what we did in Afghanistan is very similar. We provide services to the soldiers, except here that we do it obviously in a peacetime manner and do it in a way that it's where we service 6,000 plus soldiers in the Afghan theater. We did it in a tactical operational way under combat orders, and we did it for 27,000 soldiers, airmen, Marines, and other VA civilians.
Excellent, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for coming here today and for wanting to share your memories here, Colonel Alvarado. Your eyewitness account is considered a primary historical source and a valuable contribution here to our oral history project. Good morning and welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. I would like to take you back to prior to your time in service. 1985 is when you joined, and you had been a college student. But take me back even to what was going on at the time in, here, stateside, what was going on in, the economy, politics.
Okay, back in '85 when I was a college student and I was serving, actually I joined ROTC so that I can serve my nation. Back then I remember that President Reagan was the President of the United States, and during that time it was basically the climax of the issue he had with with Gorbachev, and the Cold War had reached its climax where he had to face a new leader in the Soviet Union, which is Gorbachev. And it came down to basically a desire from which side was going to overcome, which ideology was going to overcome, eventually win this Cold War. And happened to be that during that time, I think the president back then did all the right things to ensure that our country was beefed up again militarily. He replaced Jimmy Carter, who I remember when I was a kid was a president who basically, from history would say they ignored the military. And he was not one that was really a supporter of the military. Or if anything, it was the fact that during the Iran hostage situation, the military lost a lot of the, I think, of the edge within the U.S. population, and so our relationship with the civilian population was kind of in disarray, and that there's no trust in the military. So Reagan came back and he wanted to reintroduce that trust into the U.S. military. He did that. First thing he did is I remember he increased the wages and did other things that again had the population believing in the American armed forces again. So that's when I joined. Is when it was still that issue whether the United States people, the people of America, actually had that trust in America's military.
Okay. And had anyone in your family served before you?
No, I was actually the first one. Now I'm an immigrant from Ecuador, so and my father came to this country back in 1968. So when I joined, I was actually the first to go to college and the first to join the military. And to do so as an officer was even a greater accomplishment.
And can you talk about what your motivation was to do that?
It was when I was in college, I saw some of my fellow college mates who were cadets, and they got to wear the uniform. It was just the first impression with the uniform was just nice thing to see how they wore the uniform and how they had that regimental lifestyle, even though they were college students. So that was the first impression that I received, and I liked that. I wanted to be part of that. And that's when I quickly took ROTC and realized that I could actually serve my country by taking on the program and eventually getting commissioned as a lieutenant.
And where was that?
That was at Niagara University
Okay.
up in upstate New York.
Okay. And what was your degree?
My degree is in political science. And immediately after I was commissioned as a second lieutenant infantry platoon, as an infantry officer, and I was assigned to Alpha Company of the 2nd of the 113th out of Newark, New Jersey. And I am so glad that I started that way because being an infantry platoon leader actually taught me a lot of leadership and what it takes to be a leader. Because infantry is the way to do it, I think, because that's when you actually have to affirm yourself as a leader with other men in the organization. When
you say that, are you thinking of any specific examples that you can talk about?
Yes, for example, when I was in my first AT as an infantry platoon leader,
AT?
Annual training back in 1985, I had just gotten commissioned, and I had not even attended my officer basic course yet, so I was, like they say, went behind the ears, and to be able to go and participate in a tactical field tactical exercise, it was for me, it was a brand new experience, but at the same time, it gave me that opportunity to lead 30-something soldiers and to be able to give them orders and to see how they reacted to my orders. And obviously, being a brand new person, they kind of test you first. But as long as you hold your ground, and although you may not have the schooling that they have, as long as you can assert yourself as a leader and one that knows what he's doing with confidence, it can just pave the way for you to become an eventual successful leader as you progress through the career, because again, your roots were embedded in those infantry tactics. Again, when you come back at 2 o'clock in the morning from a mission, and you tell your soldiers that you have to dig in and prepare for another morning attack, again, that takes a lot of, more than anything, motivation to tell your soldiers, hey, we've got to get this thing done, and for you to pick up the first shovel and to start digging your hole yourself. They can see that, hey, this guy means business, and he's a leader that actually does it himself, and you know, the leadership by example phase begins when you were brand new second lieutenant.
Okay. And because you were ROTC, you didn't have to go to boot camp, right?
No, I didn't have to go to boot camp, but I did have to go to the infantry basic course once I was commissioned, and I did that in 1986. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and spent 5 months there. Again, just honing those infantry skills, small arms, tactics.
Do you have any stories from Fort Benning?
It was a really hard course. When you're a cadet or you're a lieutenant that had just been commissioned from the ROTC program, you're up against OCS graduates from state OCS programs. You're up against the OCS graduates from the Fort Benning program. You also, part of your class are also West Point graduates. So you have a mix of all these different commissioning components. So you get and the whole thing about it is right from the beginning, they make it out as a competition, and you compete against everybody else, and the reason you compete is because they want to make sure you get the best out of you. And it was not an easy course, but nonetheless, 5 months later, I graduated and was able to come back as a graduate of the infantry basic course, which was an accomplishment in itself.
And then you went to Newark?
I lived in Newark since 1972. So all I did is come back to my parents' house as a single man back then, and then I started dueling with the 2nd of the 113th, and started going and getting more experience in my infantry skills. Now that I have been to the infantry officer basic course, I can come back now and able to share that what I learned with my platoon, and at the same time, then it was when I started to make an assessment of my platoon and see how I can make it better, a better, more cohesive organization prepared to go into the combat zone. And back then, that's all you think about is just getting your platoon ready to get yourself ready for an eventual deployment, not knowing that that deployment will take place almost 20 years later.
What else was going on at the time overseas for us at that time?
Back in the I don't
Late
recall.
80s?
In the 80s, it was just the Iran-Contra issue with, we had, I think, communism in our own backyard over, I think, in Nicaragua. So the military was really engaged in small wars as opposed to larger scale wars. The military was in its height of its sizing, and the downsizing didn't begin until the 1990s. But from what I recall back in the middle 80s is that we were engaged in small proxy wars more than we were engaged in actual combat zones.
Somalia, Mogadishu.
Somalia and Mogadishu didn't take place, I believe, until 1991, 92. So that was more 7 years after I joined the military. So that was eventually, it was after 7 years after I joined, but it wasn't back in the mid-80s.
And Bosnia and Sarajevo.
Bosnia and Sarajevo didn't take place again until after after Yugoslavia disintegrated, and that was, I believe it was in the 90s also, and that's when all of the factions that were within that country disintegrated because that strong central leader Tito was no longer there to keep them together. But again, our military shifted its way of operational, how it conducted its operations, because they went from a warfighting machine to being a peacekeeping machine. And that was what was supposed to happen, not knowing that 9/11 would change all of that. But our army, before 9/11, became a peacekeeping organization, one that was going to be, quote unquote, the world's policeman, and to go out there and take care of everybody else's problems. But 9/11 changed that, and that now it has to take care of our own problems. And that's our enemies that are overseas that are willing to bring the fight to America.
So at any time did you anticipate that you would be sent over to any of these countries?
I was not then, because we knew that as a National Guard member and a member of an organization such as the National Guard, we were back then a strategic reserve. And that basically meant that unless there was a big war out there someplace, that our legacy force was not going to be called up to serve, although we had to obviously prepare ourselves for such an event. Nonetheless, we realized that for us to get called up back then, it's probably going to be remote.
Did things change for you at all during Desert Shield or Desert Storm?
Some things changed. I think that Desert Shield and Desert Storm, as I recall it, was a breaking point in that the United States Army, the big army, got to see it for themselves that the National Guard and Reserves were viable members of the military. That in case of a need, they could call on, rely on us to bring at least what they call the combat service support and combat support elements. I'm not so sure about the combat elements, but they could rely on us, and that we could become equal partners, and they could rely on our ability to also deploy and fight alongside of them. So they brought us that credibility with the active component.
Was that also the first war where women were in combat?
I don't believe so. I think women have served in combat since, I think they were in Korea and also in Vietnam, so.
But I meant like flying planes and all that kind of thing.
I'm not sure about that, when they first flew planes. I think that the first combat mission flown by women, I think might have been during the Bosnia. I think
Herzegovina.
Correct, the airstrikes in Bosnia, I believe. I'm not sure.
Okay. So during these years, where were you stationed besides Newark?
Okay, I started in Newark from 1985 to 1987. And in 1987, I was transferred to Delta Company of the 2nd and 113th. They're out of Jersey City. And while I was in Jersey City is when we had a battalion called the 150th Forward Support Battalion, who was co-located with us at that armory. And for some reason, we had done some training together, and I remember that they asked me if I was interested in applying for an active guard and reserve position, which is an AGR position. And I told them that I was, and I applied, and eventually we got the job. And that's when I became active duty, became an AGR soldier, and I've been doing that since 1988. So I've been an active member of the Army National Guard since September of '88 up until now.
And where was that, in Jersey City?
I was in Jersey City, and I served in Jersey City for a couple of years, and then I eventually went to the 15th Maine Support Battalion out of Lodi, New Jersey.
Where, I'm sorry?
15th Maine out of Lodi.
Lodi.
And I was there from 1981 until 1993. From 1993 to 1996, I got transferred and served under the 50th and eventually what we call the 42nd Division Support Command. And then from there, from 1999 to 2001, I served in recruiting retention out of Fort Dix. Eventually, I went to stayed at Fort Dix. I became the MO Readiness Officer, and then I became the XO, Executive Officer of the 57th Troop Command out of Atlantic City. And then after that, I was named the Battalion Commander of the 50th Personal Service Battalion, serving in Afghanistan. And now I'm the Deputy G1, serving at Fort Dix.
What was your favorite job?
There is no greater thrill than leading American men and women in a combat zone. So my favorite job was Battalion Commander in Afghanistan. It is the most demanding job, but at the same time the most rewarding job, in that what you're doing out there is the real thing. You are supporting soldiers that are actually fighting the enemy, fighting the bad guys. And the bad guys, obviously, in Afghanistan were the Al-Qaeda network and also the Taliban. And the people that you supported were those folks that were actually giving their lives, putting their lives at risk every single day to, again, fight that war. So when we did the job, we did it obviously knowing that we had soldiers to support, and we had a real easy philosophy that we live by every single day, which is what we're prepared to give the shirts off our backs and the boots off our feet to our fellow soldiers to make sure that they never had to worry about an OER, an Officer Evaluation Report, or an NCO evaluation report, or getting an ORB, an Officer Record Brief, or ERB, Enlisted Record Brief updated, or make sure that they had any worries about their mail operations, because we also did their mail for them, that we had their back, that we were going to support them. And their support was going to be continuous, it's going to be professional, it's going to be, at the same time, those going to be forward, wherever they were, we were with them. So the stuff we did was actually the real deal, in that we did it in support of the warfighter who was out there, again, giving his or her life in support of the combat operation.
Mm-hmm. And just one other thing we didn't mention was September 11th. What are your memories from that day?
I was at Fort Dix. I was in recruiting retention, and we had our quarterly meeting scheduled for that day. And then we started getting calls from, obviously the recruiters come from all over the state to Fort Dix to convene for the meeting. But we started getting calls from a few folks saying, hey, we're going to be a little bit late. There's a lot of traffic on the turnpike. And this is about, I would say, 8:45, I believe. So this was like right after the first airplane had hit. Mm-hmm. And I remember we have had a recruiter, or one of the senior guys. His name is at that time he was Master Sergeant Morton, Tony Morton, but he's now Command Sergeant Major Morton. He called me and he said, hey, I'm sitting here by the turnpike overlooking New York City, and he said the World Trade Center's on fire. That's the first time I heard about that. And so we didn't know what was happening, and all we did was turn on the television, and nobody knew what was happening. They thought that a plane had hit accidentally the building. Mm-hmm. And as we're watching the news, real life, watching the news, we see the other plane hit the other building. And then immediately we obviously knew that it was no accident. It was just an act of terrorism. And obviously our lives and the way we have conducted our lives has changed everything.
You said we went from peacekeeping to...
And that's when we shifted our efforts elsewhere. I remember that we had our forces, our brigade was actually committed to go into Bosnia as part of a rotation into Bosnia to do the peacekeeping mission in Bosnia. But as soon as the events of 9/11 happened, everything shifted towards the global war on terrorism.
So you're considered a veteran of GWOT, Global War on Terrorism, as well as Operation Enduring Freedom?
I'm considered to be a veteran of the war, of the campaign in Afghanistan, and also a veteran of the Global War on Terrorism.
Okay, very good. So you call it the campaign in Afghanistan, not the Operation Enduring Freedom?
We call it can go either way. The campaign in Afghanistan is considered Operation Enduring Freedom. That's the code name for it.
Oh,
but
okay.
the actual certificate is going to say war veteran, Afghanistan war veteran.
So what other changes did you see after the attack on 9/11?
Besides our own mission being changed, so I think that finally, I think America itself embraced the military because they knew now that they needed the military more than ever before to bring that security back home. Back then, after 9/11, I think most of America lived in fear. We did not know when the next attack would be. And that's when the president made a pledge that we will take the fight overseas, to leave the enemy overseas and not let them attack here again. But nonetheless, though, once America started to deploy its soldiers overseas and to bring the cause of the global war on terrorism to places such as Afghanistan, which was the actual nexus for the war, then we can actually feel a little more confident in that as long as the fight was overseas in the fields of Afghanistan, it was not going to take place here in the fields of America. So it was just restoring that confidence back in America. I remember sending our units to the airports at Newark and Philadelphia, but mostly it was Newark, to be able to, again, let the passengers have that confidence back in our transportation system, because that was the key to 9/11 was that we had lost confidence in our, again, the airplane industry, the airline industry. We had to make sure that confidence was restored immediately, because had that confidence not been restored and had that airline industry gone down the tubes, I think our economy would have done the same. And so our job was to go out there to the airports and let the passengers, whether they were incoming or outgoing, realizes that, hey, we're there and we're there to support you, we're there to protect you, and we're there to make sure that your flight is a safe flight, so that there be no 9/11 taking place all over again.
And did you see a change in the makeup of the fighting force?
The fighting force
Volunteers?
did not change immediately, but it changed gradually. What we saw, as soon as 9/11 hit, again, I was in recruiting retention, is that we started getting a lot of calls. But it was surprisingly wasn't the young folks, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds that we wanted to bring in. It was the older folks who had served in Vietnam, who were 65, 70 years old, wanting to join. Appreciate what they wanted to do, but it wasn't what we were looking for. But nonetheless, though, the fact is that they had called, but they were also, it was an automatic, almost instant, we had a lot of advertising, free advertising, and that's what the military is about. We advertise our services. And having 9/11 happen and having to see the soldiers deploying, soldiers at the airport, soldiers serving in Afghanistan, it was that patriotism and willingness from the American people to support and serve America that we're able to eventually get into those 18, 19-year-old kids so they can make a difference in our armed forces. So over the last several years, you have seen since 9/11 that our forces have gotten a little bit younger. And those same soldiers that we got 5, 6 years ago are the same ones that eventually did deploy into Iraq, into Afghanistan, and who are now the backbones of our organization, who are now the young leaders, and those who will make a difference in the future.
And can you describe overall their motivation and their attitude?
The motivation is just outstanding. You need soldiers that are motivated. The one thing you can't do is bring soldiers to the fight who are not motivated. Those are the ones who are going to get themselves in trouble and get the organization in trouble. But when they have soldiers that are eager, who are motivated, and are motivated towards a common purpose, which was mission accomplishment. I can tell you from experience, my soldiers in Afghanistan, they were motivated from the day one to the very last day. Mm-hmm. They were the most highly motivated soldiers that I've ever seen in my life. Now, not because I was the commander, but because you can see it every single day. And other people saw it themselves and said, these guys are absolutely motivated. And that's because we had a mix of some older soldiers, but mostly the backbone was the younger soldiers who knew they had a mission to do. They had to spend 14 months overseas and then come back and feel proud about what they did themselves. So I always reminded my soldiers that they need to make sure that their legacy was one that was embedded in doing a great job and coming back to their loved ones as conquering heroes, as opposed to, you have other soldiers who don't do that. They decide to do something which is sometimes stupid and come back and not have a legacy that is positive and one that is marked perhaps something that they were going to regret for the rest of their lives. So that's what I remember my soldiers. Hey, you make sure you have a good attitude, sustain that for the 14 months. Obviously, the days that are not good days, the days that are good days, but nonetheless, they sustained that for 14 months. And 14 months later, we got back, and the attitude's still the same. They're absolutely great soldiers, and I'm just proud that I was able to lead them.
Can you explain why the global war on terrorism started with the campaign in Afghanistan and what that entailed?
Yes.
Even before you got there.
There's an obvious reason why the global war on terrorism started in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the base where Al Qaeda actually set up their terrorist networks. That's where they had their terrorist camps. And Afghanistan was at that time was led by the Taliban, who had instituted a system of government which was based on extremist principles of the Islamic religion. And what they did is they basically protected Al Qaeda and gave them safe haven in Afghanistan. And that was the reason why we had to go into Afghanistan and get into those networks and to, first of all, get rid of Afghanistan of the Taliban government to make sure that it was no longer going to be able to perform or allow these terrorist networks to have the safe haven in Afghanistan. After the Taliban was ousted, then the job was to go in after the actual Al Qaeda network to ensure that they didn't have the capabilities to attack America again.
Okay. And I remember there were satellite photos of the training camps.
Yes, and actually, I didn't go to those training camps when I was there, but I was very close to those training camps. Those training camps were actually right on the border with Pakistan. And the reason they did that is because the terrorist network, they were actually working on both sides of the border, both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. But most of those camps were actually in Afghanistan.
Weren't we friendly with Pakistan? Or?
We are still friendly with Pakistan,
yes.
But nonetheless, is that the Pakistanis, they sympathize with the Al Qaeda network. In that, again, it's all based on their religious beliefs. They're extremists, Al Qaeda is, and what they've done is they've gone over to the Pakistan side and convinced some of the Pakistanis to also join their efforts and join their cause. And so they do have sympathizers on the other side, and that's the reason we have not been able to completely wipe them out, because they crossed into Afghanistan to conduct their business, but when we go after them, they cross into Pakistan, and we just can't get to them.
Okay. So, what was your attitude what was your reaction when you found out you were going overseas?
My reaction was obviously very positive, because as a leader, and one that was going to take a battalion overseas, it was one that I accepted it with great pride, and knowing that I was going to be able to make a difference. One thing you want to do as a leader and as a battalion commander is that you want to take your organization into a combat zone and make an impact, make a difference in the way you provide those services that we provide. I realized that from the New Jersey side, I was able to handpick some of the people that went with me, and realize that the people that I was going to bring with me are going to be the ones that are going to oversee the policies that I would implement, and at the same time take these young soldiers that we had that I mentioned before and be able to make an impact immediately, and to be able to bring that element to the combat zone, which was necessary, which is that positive attitude and that willingness to serve, and we did that as an organization.
And if I can ask, what was your family's reaction to your leaving?
As you can imagine, the family wasn't very happy over that.
How did they feel?
Initially, when we were told we're going to be going overseas, we didn't know whether it was going to be Afghanistan or Iraq. Mm-hmm. And when we heard it was Afghanistan, people thought, okay, it's not as bad as Iraq. But that's not a true statement in that. We have equally as many folks dying in Afghanistan on a true racial basis. Obviously, more people die in Iraq because there are more soldiers there. And in Iraq, the war in Iraq takes the front news, versus the war in Afghanistan has taken sometimes, it's almost like the forgotten war. But nonetheless, we've lost soldiers there almost on a daily basis. But when the family found out that it was going to be Afghanistan, they were a little bit more relieved. But then when Afghanistan started to hit the news again about the Taliban making a comeback, and when we started sustaining losses during that war, then the family was extremely worried in that we were there during a combat zone, in a combat zone in the middle of combat operations, and we were equally as susceptible to anybody else to getting hit by a rocket attack.
Mm-hmm.
But when we did convoys, we could have easily gotten hit. So it was, family was not happy. But obviously, not so much the worry of you being overseas, but the fact is that you're just not there with them to be able to be with them for those 14 months. It's hard on the family. I don't think not as hard on the soldier because we're there, we're focused on the job. It's harder on the family because they have to continue with the same lives that they had before. And now, from my perspective, my wife had to do everything I had to do and pick up that piece. And my job in Afghanistan was to focus on the mission and keep my soldiers ready and focus on their respective pieces of the mission.
Is it also harder on the family because even though you keep in touch, there's so much that you're not allowed to say?
There is. They want to know everything about where you are all the time. We can't tell them where we are all the time. We can tell them and say, look, I'm safe. I know for myself, I did a lot of traveling, and some of my soldiers did a lot of traveling. We always had to go to all the forward operating bases. In Afghanistan, we have 58 forward operating bases. Not that I got to see all of them, but I did get to travel to almost 17 of those bases. And we had soldiers at 17 of those bases. So as a commander, you have to do what they call battlefield circulation, which means you have to go and visit your soldiers. For two reasons. One, you have to go and just show your soldiers that you care for them, that just to go shake their hand and say, I appreciate what you do. They really, truly appreciate that. And the second thing is to go and talk to the people they support and say, how are my soldiers doing? Are they giving you the support that you need? And almost always, they always said my soldiers were doing what they're supposed to do. And then some of them, they were just tremendous warriors and tremendous teammates. And so I did a lot of that traveling. But my wife would always call me or actually email me and say, where are you? And I would never let her know where I was because the email doesn't tell you where you are, it just says I'm fine, I'm doing okay. But eventually, when we came back, I told her that I had done a lot of that traveling. And most of the time when we had communicated with each other, I was not at the base where she thought I was, which was Bagram Airfield. I was in Kandahar, Salerno, Jalalabad, so on and so forth.
Okay. So how was it flying over there? Where did you land when you flew over?
Well, when we first we left Camp Atterbury after our 2 months of
Is that in Maryland?
Camp Atterbury is in Indiana. When we left Camp Atterbury, we went from we took a flight, and it was interesting in that my entire task force, my battalion, was in one plane, and we went from Atterbury, had a layover in Ireland. So we got to get off the plane. It was nice to be in Ireland for whatever reason. Just the soldiers like that.
Right.
Have you ever been there in Shannon, Ireland? What they have a little like a store, and they have obviously a lot of liquor. And it's funny because we couldn't have any of that stuff, but soldiers were buying all the little things just to be able to say they were in Ireland. But the little 2-hour thing was obviously short-lived, and that we had to get back on the plane. And eventually we landed in Manas, Kyrgyzstan. That is the, used to be a Soviet province, but that is where all of the deployers into the Afghanistan theater have to actually come in and land and get processed. And it serves as a stage for the onward movement into Afghanistan. So we landed in Manas and spent 4 days there.
What was that like?
It was like a little bit of a break before it was like the calm before the storm, basically. We got to go there, and it was great because we got to be able to, for those 4 days, get our bodies ready, our body clocks ready for the time difference back to the United States. There's an 8.5-hour difference between the United States Eastern Savings EST to the Afghan time. So to go to Manas, Kyrgyzstan for 5 days, give us a chance to get our body clocks adjusted, and also give us a little more of a mental readiness thing to be able to say, okay, in 4 or 5 days we're going to be hitting the combat zone, so let's get ready. So it made a big difference in that it was good to be there, to see the soldiers for the last time, take a 4 or 5 day break, because all you do is basically eat and sleep, get your body clocks adjusted, And the fifth day, we take the tactical plane to Afghanistan. And as soon as you land, as soon as you hit the ground, you realize that for the next year, you're working every single day and putting everything you have towards that goal.
So when you left Kyrgyzstan, where exactly did you go?
We left Kyrgyzstan, we all went to Bagram Airfield. That is the central hub in Afghanistan. And that's where my battalion headquarters was headquartered out of, was Bagram Airfield. And this was the last time I had my soldiers as an organization together, up until the day we came back a year later. Because once you hit Bagram, then they put you into different flights to go all over the country. So we had our teams already preset and knew exactly where they're going to go. So when we hit Bagram, we knew exactly who had to go to Salerno, who had to go to Kandahar, who had to go, we had places, Jalalabad, and other locations, Kabul. So it gave us that chance to come in as a team and then disperse the team. So that's where Bagram did, and gave us a chance to, for the last time, see my troops together until we met again a year later. But we stayed in Bagram because that was the headquarters for the battalion.
How long did you stay there?
Well, we spent the whole year in Bagram. That was our place of duty. But like I mentioned before, a lot of us did a lot of traveling to those respective forward operating bases to see the soldiers and to see how they were performing.
What's a typical day like for you at Bagram?
No such thing as a typical day. Every day brought its challenges. Now, there were some days that looked just like the previous day and looked at just like the previous day. And our guys used to call it Groundhog's Day because the movie.
I love that movie.
It's just repetition
Right.
But there was no such thing as a typical, normal day. But if I were to give you a schedule, it would be something like this. At 5:30 we'll wake up. 5:45 we'll have our physical fitness formation because we did physical training 5 days a week. At 6 o'clock we will begin physical training from 6 to 7 o'clock. 7 to 8 o'clock is personal hygiene breakfast time, and then at 8:30 is when we actually have we started our work hours. 8:30 in the morning and work until 10 o'clock at night. Now, some of our soldiers, the ones that provided the services, we let them home. We let them finish early at about, I would say, 6 p.m., 6:30. But the leadership, we had to then prepare for the next day's missions. And so we stayed till 9:30, 10 o'clock. But for myself, I would be in my office until about 11 o'clock at night, preparing for the next day's missions. And every single day at 9 o'clock in the morning, I had what they call a audio conference with the entire leadership of the Afghan theater, and that's when I got my 5 minutes worth of update. I had to update the commanders as to what I was doing with my services, and most of my updates were concerning postal services, because we brought that one very important element to the combat zone, which was the postal delivery throughout those fobs to the soldiers. And as you know, soldiers want to make sure they get the mail on time, especially packages from the loved ones back home. So we had to make sure that we briefed the bosses, the commanders, on when they were going to get the mail at each one of those 58 fobs. And all they wanted was predictability on the battlefield. Hey, when am I going to get my mail? And if a soldier got his mail every 7 days, we were happy. If it missed that 7-day mark, then I had to explain why did we miss it and where was the next delivery. Sometimes we had fobs that went 30 days without getting mail. And that's because lack of air assets, we just couldn't get the mail on the helicopter because the weather is pretty bad up there, unpredictable weather. It's harsh terrain. So we had to do everything we can to make sure that we got their mail to them at the earliest opportunity. And sometimes when we had a helicopter ready to go with the mail, a special mission would just bump my mail off the helicopter and then they will load something else. So, but they understood what we were doing, and they knew that we were working hard on their behalf. So every day I lived that. And then we also had another important mission, which is what we had to do is called casualty operations. Every single casualty on the Afghan battlefield was transmitted to my battalion, and then we had to transmit it to the Casualty Assistance Command in Kuwait to notify the families back home. So we saw every single casualty in Afghanistan. We saw the names, we saw the faces, we saw the events that led to that casualty,
How did you see the faces?
We saw the faces in that we use a report called DSIPs, and when we had to do the database, we pulled up the pictures, and eventually our soldiers were able to see who they were dealing with, and the saddest thing about that mission is that 2 days after that, or normally not more than 3 days, is that same soldier who had fallen on the battlefield, whose remains were flown into Bagram. They were obviously, the remains were prepared for shipment back to the United States, and we had what they call a full-on combat ceremony. And so we got to not just see the faces, now we got to see the bodies. Basically, when it left the morgue to the flight line, and that was really sad because we got to see the reality of the war. And like I said, we lost a soldier here, a soldier there. We saw the one name, the one face, and we had the full-on combat ceremony for one soldier. Sometimes there was 2 soldiers. There's one incident when we lost 12 soldiers in a helicopter crash, and we got to see 12 bodies go in front of us, and that was just tough because we knew that what we're doing was the real thing, and we had some real outstanding soldiers, heroes that were dying every day on behalf of our corps.
And how did that affect morale in your unit?
Actually, believe it or not, it helped morale in that our soldiers knew that what they were doing was the good thing, that what we were doing in Bagram was a lot easier than what the people out there were doing. We're not warfighters, we're support the warfighters, we're soldiers. And what our guys were doing was basically administrative work in support of the people out there giving their lives. So I would remind my soldiers that, look, I mean, we have a long time to go before we go, but at the same time, we're not out there living in the mountains like these warfighters are. We have it easy here. So let's serve with honor, serve with distinction, and serve those guys out there. So it actually served to motivate them to do a better job to support our warfighters.
And do any of the fallen soldiers stand out for you? Anyone in particular?
Yes. We had a soldier, and I'm not going to get into his name because it's unnecessary, but we had a soldier who was a medic right out of Bagram, who got called in to assist with an IED that hit a vehicle, and there was another soldier who had lost his right arm. So the soldier actually came down on a hoist from a helicopter because there's still a battle going on. He came down from the hoist, and he was able to actually put a tourniquet on the soldier's arm and basically save his life. But as the stretcher was going up on the helicopter, the hoist snapped and it fell on that soldier, so it killed them both.
Oh, no.
And it was really, really sad, and that medic, he was a true hero, and that he saved a life, but ironically, it wasn't for too long, and that he lost his own life in doing so. And those are heroes that we saw that lived with us, lived in the same building with us, and that the next day we know that they're there, and you see him in that body bag, and we do a full-on combat ceremony for that soldier. And another soldier was a sergeant major that came out of Maryland. He was a really down-to-earth guy. He was such a great guy. And you get to see him and get to live with him and get to see what he's about. And we share stories about our kids, and he had grandkids, and I mean, he was a really nice guy. Because some sergeant majors are, as you know, they're really mission focused, which they're supposed to be, and I love him for that. But this guy was a really down-to-earth guy. And he came in my office one day, and he became really good friends with my sergeant major. And maybe exchanged a little bit of a gift from his own organization. And he used to have coffee made every morning and say, hey, here's coffee for you guys. And one day he got in a helicopter, got shot down, he was dead. And that's just the things that happen in the combat zone. To know that he was gone and gone forever. But at least we're able to see him and know him, and to have been able to be blessed that we got to know him for a little while. True heroes. And
do you still think about them?
I try not to, but you can't help it but to think about them. When you go into a combat zone, you're not hit with death every single day. As far as directly, you're hit with death indirectly, in that you see the deaths take place out there. Not just American soldiers, but also coalition soldiers, Afghan National Army soldiers, Afghan National Police, the folks that are on our side. So you see that there's not a single day that goes by that something doesn't happen where people lose their lives. So when you come back from this 14-month endeavor, you try not to think about it too much, but you can't help but to think about it. It's embedded in your mind, it's embedded in your heart, and wherever you go, you bring them with you. The memories are there, and from my perspective is, I lived this for a long time, and it's something you just can't get out of your mind. It takes a while to think about it, but I can't help but to think about it.
And does it change you and make you realize how valuable life is, and that you would go forward and honor their memory by how you live your life?
Yes, I do. I do honor the memory in that I like to lead a life that's, again, full of joy, but we know that's not reality. Reality is that, and the bigger picture is that these guys gave their lives for a bigger cause, which is democracy, and realize that we're bringing something new to the people of Afghanistan, bringing to them democracy and the rule of the people so that they can choose for themselves their system of government. And we hope that that eventually is going to be able to basically sprout throughout that region so that other people of the world can also see and benefit from democracy. So it has a direct impact on how we live our lives here, and that we know about democracy. We, the people of America, we take it for granted in that we think everybody in the world has what we have, which is freedom. And we also have the economic luxury to go buy whatever we want. But when you go overseas, you see that's not the case with the rest of the world. So how do I honor their memory? Again, is by ensure that my life is going to be one that's going to continue to do what's best for this nation so that we can bring our cause overseas. And I have to serve again, I'll do it again. So that we can make sure that the people of all the worlds, they can benefit from what we benefit from, and that's the freedoms that we have in this country.
It's very well said. What about the Afghanis? What kind of shape were they in? What did you notice about the civilians, or even, you said the Afghani National Army or police?
Okay. The Afghanis, actually, their money. Afghan is how we call them. They're called Afghan. The Afghan people, they're really, really nice people. Once you befriend them, they become your friends. They are willing to do anything for you. But interesting, I had a conversation with one of my friends that I made over there, an Afghan. His name was Nasrullah, and I asked him. I said, what do you think of the Taliban? And he said, oh, Taliban. They were basically what he said. They were a pain in the neck. They were just they're a nuisance more than anything else. That's how he described it. Then I asked him about the Soviets, because the Soviets had occupied Afghanistan for 10 years. He says, oh, he hated the Soviets because what they did is they came in and they basically wanted to come in and destroy and basically use bombs to bring them to submission. And he said that they came in and they did not in any way respect their religion. They were absolutely monsters, as he described it. So then I asked him about what he thought of Americans. And he said, well, we still need to give you guys more time to see what you guys can actually do for us. So as you can see, we still haven't really won them over yet, but at the same time, we haven't lost them yet. So it's interesting that they're giving us a chance. And they respect us, and that's what he says, we respect you. Because what we do is we have two things going on simultaneously in Afghanistan, and that's kinetic and non-kinetic effects. Kinetic being that we are engaging the enemy with bombs and missiles and destroying those systems, but at the same time we do non-kinetic effects, and that is we're actually building bridges in schools and building their infrastructure, political, economic, so that they can see the other side of America, and that we're not just going to be bombs against them, we're also going to be building you a better system, better way of life if you choose to follow our method. So I think it's working. We still have a long ways before we actually get there, but the Afghans, they're really open-minded people. They have big hearts, and I think that if we do the right things, that we're going to win them over and eventually win this war.
And by the time you got there last year, had that already been happening?
It had been happening since day one. That's one thing we did in Afghanistan that is absolutely the right way to do it. It began as a exercise to get rid of the Taliban government, but at the same time, to institute a government. Realize that President Karzai, he's the president of Afghanistan, but he's a democratically elected president. So as we have brought in democracy, we also are ensuring that there are benefits that come with that democracy, such as, again, building those roads, building those schools, bring electricity to some of these locations that they don't know what electricity is. So it's, and the way we do it is that it's not America is doing this for you. We're doing this in that the Karzai government is doing this for you. The government of Afghanistan is doing this for you. The people that you put in power are doing this for you. So they can see the benefits of democracy. But if you don't like the way this guy is doing this for you, then you have a right to put somebody else in there that can do this for you. So that's what we're trying to do. It's called the Afghan First Program. So nothing that we do is the American effort. It's an Afghan effort. Yes, it's supported by the Americans, but they see it's an Afghan effort for the Afghan people, so that the Afghan people can see that the Afghan government made by the Afghans is better for Afghanistan than it is a government that is going to be, again, led by extremism, and it's going to be only going to set them back like it had been under the Taliban's regime.
And how did the election process go for them? Was voting
the election process
safe?
The voting was very safe. The one thing that the initial challenges in Afghanistan was that Afghanistan is made up of several thousand tribes, and we had to get them out of that mindset. In that they were whatever the tribal leader would say is how the rest of the tribes would actually vote, the rest of the tribe members. So we had to make sure and go in there and mostly work with the tribal leaders to ensure that there was what they call a coalition type of system of government that was power sharing, so that the different tribes, the bigger tribes, were able to have elected officials within part of the government. So it made everybody part of the elected governmental system there, so that every single major tribe is actually represented in their political system.
Earlier, did you mention coalition forces?
Correct. Afghanistan has 43 coalition forces serving alongside the Americans. And now that in Afghanistan, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is actually in charge of some of the efforts in Afghanistan. For the last 3 months in Afghanistan, we actually fell under NATO control. And we were able to work alongside the NATO countries to, again, conduct combat operations.
So do you have any memories of any specific countries that you were
That's a great question, because I have a great memory. One of the absolutely outstanding nations, and their teammates in all aspects, they're absolutely great soldiers, they're great human beings, were the Koreans. They had a camp very near our camp, but they brought the combat engineers with them. And what they did is they had their own mess hall for the Koreans. And once you got to know them, they invited you to come and eat with them. And same thing, we invited them for them to come eat at our mess hall. But those folks, when we teamed up with them to do certain missions, these guys were absolutely professional. And their military is very similar to our military in that it's a professional organization made up of very few conscripts. But they're structured just like we are, same rank system. And they were just eager to get to know us, we're eager to get to know them. And we used to have these events every Friday night where we just get together socially and just have some near beers, because we didn't have the real beers. And just get to know about them culturally and exchange presents, exchange cultural events during Christmas time and other events. And they were just tremendous, tremendous teammates, and they were just an honor to get to know.
That's nice. What about the Afghan police and the Afghan army?
The Afghan
Were they
National
well supplied?
Army and the Afghan National Police, they're a new organization. They've only been around for 5 years. Keep in mind, though, that a lot of the leaders of that organization, the Afghan National Army, were former members of the old Taliban regime. They were all former members of that military. Of course, they've embraced our values now, or embraced our system, to be able to remain as those leaders. But they are part of our team now. The thing about the Afghan National Army is that they are made up of, it's a volunteer force, but they're still try to pay them a little bit more than they got paid before. but they lack training, and they lack that to sustain those skills that a veteran soldier has. So their AWOL rate's pretty high. It's almost like 30% per month. So as you can imagine, trying to keep an organization together and be able to sustain those collective skills and individual skills is very hard. So they're doing the best they can to make it a professional army, to get him involved in a lot of these operations alongside the Americans. But it's very hard in that they lack training, and they lack that cohesiveness that a military unit must bring to the fight in order to be able to conduct combat operations. So they're getting better. We're training them every single day to make sure that they incorporate our tactics, our techniques, our procedures. But it's going to be a while before they can actually become a truly functional, operational, standalone force. It's going to be a while before they do that.
Once they can lower that turnover rate, maybe that would help.
I think it would help, but that won't be the only thing that they will need. I think they're going to eventually need is to be able to sustain their combat effectiveness by actually being able to have leaders that are capable of being able to lead those units. And they don't have that yet. They have senior leaders that are experienced, but they need that junior grade level leadership, the lieutenants, captains. They don't have that yet.
And that takes a while.
It takes a while to be able to get one commissioned and then get eventually one developed to be able to sustain that. And they don't have that yet. And so they're missing that middle level leader.
Mm-hmm. And when you talked earlier about building bridges, building schools, building a water supply or whatever, what about building connections with people, like the next generation, the kids? There's also that good impression that you're leaving on the kids, that Americans are not as bad as you probably were told they were.
Right. The one thing that we do for the kids, not so much for the male kid, because the males, they have been able to go to school with no problems. Mm-hmm. But for the females, the young women of Afghanistan, they were denied the opportunity for education where the Taliban was there. Right. So what we did is we have opened up schools and made them open for young females so that they can see, they can be able to read and learn how to read, learn how to write, and bring them into society. I mean, a society without the benefits of what a female brings is no society at all. I think society has to be able to have both the males and the females working alongside each other. In Afghanistan, it's a male-centric society. And once we get these young females to learn how to read it and become members of society, then we're going to see that as an added benefit for the entire purpose. So it's going to be a while before we see that, but we've started with the school systems, and I think education's the number one thing. Started at the very bottom foundation, which is the educational system, make sure these kids have become educated, and then especially on the female side, and so we can see that they're going to benefit when they become older adults, and they can be, and then hopefully become part of this democracy that we believe for them.
Mm-hmm. I imagine there must have been a bit of a culture shock for the females that you served with to be there, and the attitude towards women, or?
The one thing, ironically, I have not seen yet, I never got to see in Afghanistan, was a female from Afghanistan. I saw them, but I never saw their faces because they still wear their I think they call burqas. Right. And that's not because they are required to do the same, that's because they do it by choice. And that's because it takes a while for them to get that thing out of the notion out of their minds that it's okay for them to take it off. They just don't do it. So for our females serving over there, I think the shock was that they saw females that had no liberties, and perhaps they got a great appreciation for what they themselves have, which is the liberty to be themselves, to be educated, to go to school, to be able to serve alongside men as equal partners.
And to be visible, right?
To be visible, to do what they want to do, and to know that in Afghanistan, a woman does not have rights, still do not have rights, and to be able to bring those rights back to women, it's going to take, again, a generation of educated women to be able to fight for those rights themselves. But until it's, in the meantime, while it's still a male-centric, male-dominated society in Afghanistan, that's not going to be in place for a while until the women can do that for themselves.
So the main thing that we're doing to help women are building girls' schools?
Building girls' schools. We do have some organizations, not military sponsored, but they're non-governmental organizations, her out there working with women to ensure that women, again, know about their own rights, know about their own capabilities. Because you got to realize is that in Afghanistan, women have been robbed of their identity as capable individuals. What the Taliban did is made them basically subordinate to the males. So women have to be given that confidence that, hey, and by seeing our own women out there, our own leaders, that we're talking about some real good people, and can show them, hey, we can do it also. To bring women doctors, to bring women, again, engineers, they can say, hey, women can do it also.
Role models.
And role models,
Right.
and that's helping the cause. And not just Americans, but also you got non-governmental agencies working there to ensure that the women's right is now being addressed, and that the current government gives women the opportunities that it's given men. It's not quite there yet, but at least we're making progress. And I think that one generation from now, you're going to see that women will be back as mainstream participants in the Afghan political system.
And what's the economy like there for the Afghans?
The economy is pretty bad. Now, what we have done is we have stabilized their economic system. For every $1, you get 50 Afghanis. But nonetheless, though, the economic system is, there's no real source of an export product that Afghanistan has. There's no oil, or there's nothing else. What they do have are perhaps rugs, or minerals. They do have, I think, precious stones, but that's not enough to sustain a country economically. So what a lot of the folks in Afghanistan do is they live off their lands.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see a big piece of property that's been basically built but it's mostly just like a wall made out of mud, and inside that wall is another house made out of mud, and within that house, that compound, you'll see perhaps 10 heads of sheep, and they live off the land. So that's the life. So you don't see anything spectacular. Even the capital city, you'll see the same thing with a lot of destruction from the war. You'll see a lot of buildings that have collapsed. That no immediate plans to bring them back up and to reconstruct these buildings. It's a poor country, and you see the people alongside the streets basically living in pure poverty. And these are the folks that are making, again, these are the folks in Afghanistan that we're relying on to be able to back us up, and we got to make sure we do a little bit more for them economically.
And what kind of spirit do they have? Are they positive? Are they hopeful?
Like I said before, they're giving us an opportunity. They're not, haven't crossed into either side. They're on the fence right now. I think a lot of them
about their lives as they go day to day.
You know, it's an interesting question in that the Afghan people have seen and been in a war status for 2,000 years. They do not know what it is to live in peace. They do not know what it is to not live with an occupation force, whether it be the Americans or the Russians or Genghis Khan, okay, being in their country. They don't know what it is to have a country that's ruled by them, a country that is policed by them. They don't know what it is. They've always seen a foreign occupation force on their soil for 2,000 years. So what is their attitude? An attitude is this is business as usual. If it's not the Americans, it'll be somebody else. So that's why we try to convince them that no, we're the real thing. We're going to make a difference for you. And eventually, it's not going to be the Americans. It's going to be the Afghans taking care of yourselves. So what's the attitude? It's a wait-and-see attitude. It's nothing new for them to see a foreign occupation force. When I was there, it looked at me as a foreign occupier. And one that's probably going to be there for a long time, but eventually, one that's going to eventually leave, and somebody else will come in and take over for what we're doing. And so that their attitude is, hey, if it's not you guys, it'll be somebody else.
Now I'm curious about when you left, what was your opinion of how much progress you had helped make for that country?
I think in the 1 year we've been there, we did, when I say we, I'm talking about we, the United States and our coalition partners. We instituted the Afghan First program, which I mentioned before, which is putting an Afghan face to an Afghan to a product to let the people know that the Afghans could do it. The one thing that we started when we were there was we started with economic projects. We started giving, asking the Afghan people to come up with their own organizations and corporations so we can give them projects. For example, all of our bottled water was imported from Saudi Arabia at I think a clip of $1 per bottle of water. So this had to come all the way from Saudi Arabia into Afghanistan for the American soldier or the coalition soldiers to be able to utilize. And that's a multi-million-dollar contract with this company in Saudi Arabia. So what we did is that we had an Afghan company start a water bottling company within Bagram Airfield. So we gave them all the economic resources to be able to have to build this factory, and they did. While we were there, they built the factory, hired 200 local nationals, Afghans, and now the water that is actually served is actually water that's made in Afghanistan by Afghan, and then the money that's made out of this is going back to the Afghan people. So that's something like a start that we had. Another one we had was we had to build an airstrip in Jalalabad, and instead of having the Army Corps of Engineers do that, we let the Afghans do that. They started their own company, and they got their own equipment, and they built the airfield for us. So those are the things we do that so that we can start doing that. And then when we start building the roads out in Afghanistan, the major roads to connect the major cities, instead of the American Corps of Engineers doing it, we let the Afghans do that. So we've trained, first we trained them, then we hired them, okay, to be able to build their own roads. And when the Afghan people see that, they see Afghans doing it and not the Americans. But they know that the Americans are closely behind that, supervising the project and obviously footing the bill for the project.
And the Afghans are good workers? And
the Afghans they're okay workers.
Oh, okay.
Keep in mind that in America and in other industrialized nations, the workers, we know what it takes to go and work 8-9 hours a day, have a 30-minute lunch break, and basically, give the full effort every single day. So it's a cultural shock when you have to hire an Afghan national, because every 2 hours you have to, first of all, take a 30-minute break to go to pray. So they bring their rugs out and they'll face it to Mecca, and they pray for 30 minutes. So you realize that 5 or 6 times a day they have to pray. So for the 8 hours you got them hired, I think they'll work probably 4 hours. And that's why sometimes projects that normally would take 2 months would probably take 5 or 6 months. So
the praying.
That work ethic.
Maybe they should pray that the project gets done.
Probably, but the work ethic is just not there yet.
Right.
Okay, and that's because that work ethic is, in a way, it's being impeded by their religious requirements.
Right. Do you have any other stories from Afghanistan that we haven't touched on?
Oh, I got a million, but I don't think you have time for all that stuff. But
well, when you think back, what do you mostly remember?
The one thing that I remember the most is being on Thanksgiving Day there. Now, Thanksgiving was we have been there for almost 10 and a half months, and as a commander, I'm trying to keep my organization together, make sure that we don't in any way fracture our organization, that all the soldiers stay motivated and stay basically efficient in their individual tasks. But at the 10 and a half month mark, when Thanksgiving comes, that's when all my soldiers in their previous lives have spent time at home. And it's the first times in their lives that they're not going to be home. They're going to be in a combat zone. And still had a month and a half to go before we got back. But I remember just having dinner with the soldiers. We had a place that we had reserved for just the members of my battalion. And just going to the mess hall, and what they did is they did a nice thing. They decorated the place with turkeys, and they had some extra food for us. They had shrimp, they had steak. I mean, it was a nice event for us. But nonetheless, though, sitting with the soldiers, we said a little prayer, then I thanked them for their service, thanked them for the sacrifice, and let them know that they were making history. They were making part of American history. That someday, 20, 30 years from now, their sacrifice will actually be fruitful in that we're going to see a better world. And I tell them that please do not forget that what they're doing was something good for our nation, doing something good for the world. And so after I said that, we sat down, everybody held hands. And we just said, hey, this is great. And although nobody said a word after that, we're all sad because, we all want to be with our wives and kids, husbands, wives, daughters, sons. But we all understood that we were there for a reason, and it was a good reason. And after that, we all kind of hugged, shook hands, and said, okay, guys, got a month and a half to go. And that's the one thing I remember the most from my soldiers, because the one element from a combat zone that you cannot put into words is the human element. And the human element will bring you challenges every single day, but at the same time will give you surprises. And the surprise that I received is that my soldiers, no matter how hard it was, they were always able to do their thing, their jobs, and they were always up to the task. And 12 months later, we came back, and I was able to tell the families that I brought 210 soldiers to Afghanistan, and I was able to bring 210 soldiers back home.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And that sounds like one Thanksgiving that no one there will
Never
ever
forget,
forget.
never forget.
Yeah.
It was just great. It was just in my heart, I said I could be with my family, or I could be with my soldiers, and I realized that then the soldiers there were my family,
Right.
and we were all family, a big family together. So it just realizes that some sacrifices are worth it, and that's when we realized that our sacrifice was absolutely worth it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I want to say that I'm honored and humbled that you came here today to speak to me, Colonel Alvarado, of your sacrifice and contribution that you made in service to your country. And thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
In a combat zone is one that you never ever forget. Like I mentioned before, it's something you always bring with you. Your mind's always on it. And I look back with nothing but with pride in that we did it the right way. Nobody did anything stupid. Nobody did anything dumb. We did everything with ethical and moral mindset that we need to go there and do it for ourselves or for our families, so that we can be looked at as being true heroes, if you want to call it, but heroes in the sense that we did it based on servitude and not based on individual reasons. A lot of soldiers will do it for individual reasons. We didn't do that. We did it for organizational reasons.
And we didn't talk about what your homecoming was like.
The homecoming was an event that I'll never forget also. And that's a good question, because in your mind, you're always thinking about the day you'll come home.
Right.
And you replay it a million times as to how it's going to be. The two things you play in your mind is like, how is going to be my initial incorporation with my family? How am I going to be able to see them again? How will that initial get-together will be like? And then the second thing is, the big parade or whatever is out there, because everybody thinks in those glorious terms sometimes. But the homecoming, we came back, and the day we actually landed at McGuire Air Force Base. That same afternoon, we were able to see our families for a couple hours, and that was like, it was like kind of like an event that it played in your mind a million times. So when you did it, actually, it was already had happened. It was just going through the motions. It's kind of funny that you don't feel that same thing that you're supposed to feel. That, I don't know, it was just it's hard to explain, but it's something that you have played in your mind. You had hoped it'll be, and it's exactly how it was. So it was kind of scripted, but it was still great to be home, though. But then the actual homecoming ceremony was at Lawrenceville Armory, and my soldiers received a tremendous parade. And I have to thank General Reed for putting that together. He was able to get a lot of the community, the whole community out of Lawrenceville, got the political leaders, got the schools, got the families.
I found some pictures.
All right. And when we got there, it was a parade, and then the governor greeted us, and it was just it was a true hero's welcome. And again, it was just great. It was just like it was described in the. You'll see, like when a hero comes back, it was like that. We got to live for that for about a couple hours. It was nice.
Did you recognize any of these soldiers?
Yes. This is Special Sweet. Okay. He used to work postal operations for me. He worked at the Bagram post office. Worked the midnight shift. Worked from 12 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock in the morning. Young kid. He's I think 23, 24 years old. But one of those that the smile that he has on this picture is the same smile he had for the whole time he was there. Always, every place you see him, he's always smiling, great attitude, just a tremendous soldier, and one that I was truly privileged to have had on my team.
You can keep that.
Okay. The next soldier here, her name is Lieutenant Monique Smith. She's one of my detachment commanders. She commanded the 250th Personal Services Detachment. Now, she did a great job in that she was able to keep that focus on the soldiers to do their jobs. She made sure that her teams were always taking care of their mission, take care of the customers. She traveled throughout those various FOBs to make sure that those soldiers were doing their job. And whatever she needed to tweak the team, she used to always make changes to make sure that we had those soldiers. And she's actually a police woman for a living on her civilian life. This is Specialist Rosario. She was one of my casualty operations soldiers. She did casualty operations. She would actually be the ones that will receive the casualties and reports and then submit those reports to Kuwait. But she had, again, great attitude. And she was one of the folks that people looked up to because she was always always eager to do anything that it took and always did the right thing all the time.
Here's the last one.
Okay, these guys actually these are not part of my team, but this is the embedded training team.
Oh.
Okay, these are the guys that also went with us, but they were not part of our team. What they were doing was that they were actually in charge of training the Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police. I get to make them better soldiers. I think in the foreground here is Lieutenant Colonel Heineman, who was actually one of their leaders. But these guys did a tremendous job in their own right.
And do you still see or work with these 210 that you went with?
Unfortunately, no. When I got back, I was obviously reassigned from my position of commander of the 50th PSB. So I'm not in charge of them anymore, but I do get to see a lot of those soldiers that work at Fort Dix that were part of my team. I see them all the time, and when you see them, it's a brotherhood for life thing. Because one thing we do is we see each other, we acknowledge each other, no matter where you are, because these are the guys that you live with for 14 months and serve with. So it's a brotherhood that's going to be there for the rest of their lives. And what I told my soldiers when I left command was, no matter where they were, no matter where I went, that I was always going to be their big brother, and that whatever they needed, they can always come to me, and I will do everything I could to be able to take care of them.
Do you keep in touch and write letters and emails?
I do keep in touch with a few folks. Interestingly, one of my detachments was from Tennessee, and I get emails from those guys more than I get from my New Jersey guys. Now, keep in mind that the guys from New Jersey I get to see on the weekend drill, so there's no need maybe for that occasional email.
Right.
But the folks from Tennessee, and another unit that I had also was from Pennsylvania, I get emails a lot, and what they always say is, hey, it was great to have you as a commander. You were always fair, and that they learned from me. Especially the younger leaders do. I got an email the other day from one of my specialists. He actually received an Article 15 over there that I gave him. He did something dumb, and he came back and he says, hey, thank you for that Article 15, because that made him realize that what a soldier was supposed to be. And he said that I wasn't as harsh as it could have been, but he learned from that, and now he's learned from that mistake. But he said that I was really fair with him, and that he actually looks up to me, which is actually shocking. That I thought he didn't really care for me because of that Article 15. But to hear from him saying that from himself, that he learned from me as far as how an officer should carry himself, conduct himself, is something nice, because he himself is pursuing a career to become an officer.
And that must reinforce for you that feeling of pride that you mentioned when you left Afghanistan.
Right. I mean, the one thing that as a commander you do is that every single thing, I mean, you make 1,000 decisions a day, and you always pray that whatever you're doing is the right one. But you also have to be very decisive. One thing you can't do is not be decisive and take your time in making a decision. You have to do it on the spot. Sometimes you get the advice of your sergeant major or your executive officer, but eventually it's going to be your decision. And you don't want to make the one that's going to cause somebody to lose their life.
Right.
And that's the toughest one you can make. So when we got back, I had the feeling of pride, because I've always did everything I did. I never did anything for my own sake. I never did anything for the advancement of my own, perhaps my own career, or worse, my own ego, because a lot of people do that. I did it all because my organization deserved a leader that used common sense, was a practical leader, one that used always the military principle of putting the organization first above everything else. And that's what we sustained 12 months worth of just outstanding support to the soldiers. And at the very end, my brigade commander from the active duty told me that of the 10 battalions he had in his battalion, mine was the best. And it was just very proud that to be a National Guard organization made up of soldiers that had never served more than perhaps 3-4 months on active duty when they were basic training, to come into a combat zone and do what we did. It was just great.
And it's got to be like the icing on the cake to get that feedback, right, from say the guys in Tennessee. And
It's I would call it more than feedback. It's just
oh yeah.
it's I forget the word I want to use right now, but it gives you that validity that validates what you did.
Right.
In that they themselves can see now that they made it home themselves, and they got their welcome home. They got the heroes welcome, and they can see. And like I told them for the whole 12 months, your legacy is what you got to work on your legacy. And they know that the legacy now is one that was a good legacy, one that's built on the principles of sound military principles, such as serve with pride, serve with dignity, and then come back to your loved ones as heroes. And I think that they appreciate that. Not because I had anything to do with that. I mean, I'm the leader. I just had something to do with that, in that I always get that perspective, and it was them themselves that adopted that, and were able to take my advice, and again acted in accordingly to what they're supposed to do the right things, and that's why we succeeded.
I know you're a humble soldier, but I hope that you print out those emails and put them into some kind of scrapbook for your kids. Someday they'll have your legacy.
I think I'll
along
do
with
that.
this video.
I think I'll do that.
Yeah.
What I did do when I was there, I did it probably when I was there for the first couple of months. I had a little like a journal that I kept.
Oh,
But back in the old days, journals were handwritten. But now these days, you just go on the computer and kind of. So I kept a journal in a Word format. I have about maybe 10 entries about my experiences there, and that's what I think I'll share with my sons and my son and my daughters and their grandkids about the perspective of being there, about how this was going to be a life-altering event, and that eventually they're going to be the ones who reap the benefits of my sacrifice and the sacrifice of my soldiers, and that I think we're better off now than we were 6 years ago, in that we're keeping the enemy where they're supposed to be in their own backyards, as opposed to let them come to our backyards and perhaps endanger the welfare of our own family members here.
Well, thank you, sir. You did an incredible job here today.
Well, thank you. It's always nice to tell a story, not of Walter Alvarado, but of my battalion. I had 210 heroes, and they are absolutely the reason that I'm so proud of these guys and gals. I had a great organization because I had great teammates, and it's one thing you need in a combat zone is teamwork. There's no such thing as doing it by yourself. We all did it working with each other, working in conjunction with each other, and everybody there. Every single one of my soldiers was made to understand that he or she was a critical part of the team, and they all believed in that their role was a critical role, and they all felt part that what they were doing was the right thing. And so we sustained that for 12 months, and that's why they all came back, and they could all look back now and say they did something in a positive way for the betterment of that war, and eventually for the betterment of the world.
Well, Colonel, I might add that I consider you a critical part of my Veterans Project, and that you gave such a unique perspective, and the things you touched on are historical facts that we haven't had up till in the last 6 years that we've been doing this. So you did an excellent job. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Up. These are pictures of the soldiers from the 250th Personnel Services Battalion. Looks as if some cars they received. Local schools throughout the deployments, Iraq and Afghanistan, will make packages of cards from the kids just to go to generic soldiers. That's what this looks like. This looks like a soldier, an NCO from the PSB handing out candy, and it looks like coloring books to local Afghan children. This looks like some soldiers in formation on their forward operating base. probably putting out the message for the day before convoy. Here's a soldier doing a little bit of a recon. I think this is at the grenade range, but back home before they deployed. Again, Afghanistan, handing out items to children. And here's a soldier with some children on the road. This looks like pre-flight in Afghanistan. This is their personnel section taking care of paperwork. This is the unit conducting PT on the FOB in the morning. This is the unit conducting target practice or weapons qualification. Same thing here. And this is a morale, welfare, recreation, playing a little softball. This is when the Adjutant General visited, handed out phone cards. And that's the end.
Okay, thank you.